Hello ladies and gentlemen, Top Hat Gaming Man here. Recently on this channel I released an extremely popular in-depth series of videos covering the Streets of Rage trilogy. This led to many people in the comment section to ask for more, with a specific demand for me to cover a well-known fan game known as Streets of Rage Remake. Streets of Rage Remake, despite being a fan game, is often considered to be the greatest Streets of Rage game ever made, topping the quality of all 3 entries in the trilogy released throughout the 90s. So today we are going to take an in-depth look at the history of this game, the game's overall quality, and discuss whether there is any truth to this bold statement. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the mad story of Streets of Rage Remake. Yeah! The world of video games has always been an environment where only the fittest survive. The speed of evolution in the entertainment medium between the popularisation of Pong in the 1970s up until the games today has been quite frankly ridiculous. We have come a long way in a very short time. To go from this in just a few decades almost feels like a work of science fiction. You could argue that by the early 90s 2D games looked pretty beautiful, and gameplay had been refined enough to deliver quality experiences many of us would continuously go back to for a lifetime. In just 2 or 3 years later, by the mid-90s, many fans, journalists and industry insiders considered this style of gaming to be old hat. In fact, they looked at gaming's future to be specifically 3D polygon focused. Between the mid-90s and mid-2000s, 2D gaming would practically die out, and as a result, by the time consumers were in the early PS2, GameCube and Xbox era, 2D gaming experiences were pretty much restricted to handhelds, and the release of the Nintendo DS would even threaten that stronghold. This 10-year period in history was all about the refinement of polygon gaming, and the further we travelled through time, the less likely it felt that we would continue to get more quality 2D experiences. In my opinion, this dull period in mainstream gaming was what led to the retro gaming boom. Many people got sick and tired with playing the same AAA tripe, and instead were beginning to decide to imitate a playstyle of the past by digging out their old Super Nintendos and Mega Drives in order to get a high quality gaming experience that the industry simply were not capable of giving to them. Whilst many of you at home may have been playing ugly grey first person shooters, yuck, I was going from boot sale to boot sale, building a huge classic gaming library, picking up unwanted Nintendo and Sega games for 50p a pop. Enthusiasm for older games though did not simply end with simply collecting and playing the games of the past though. The progression in technology had begun to allow fans of these old games at home to be able to create ROM hacks and fan games based on 2D properties fans knew and loved. Over time, the release of a new Streets of Rage game was looking increasingly less likely. Sega fans' love for the Streets of Rage series would never diminish, and there would be various fan projects that would pop up over time that would further pronounce this. One example of this came with a game in 2003 known as Beats of Rage, a game that was initially released by Senile Team. Beats of Rage is a fan tribute to Streets of Rage that supplants the original graphics and characters with resources taken from the King of Fighters series. The game that was just made for fun took the developers by surprise, as over 1 million people would download and play the game, a huge number considering that the game was not even advertised and people just discovered it via word of mouth online. This interesting game has a unique history of its own, which I may cover with you in more detail down the line. But today it's all about the Streets of Rage Remake, a game that would begin development the exact same year Beats of Rage hit the internet. Speaking of 2003, we were still in a period in history where the world of gaming was very much a 3D polygon hell, so it is no surprise that Streets of Rage proved so popular, as this was around the time I began to massively go out hunting for old games in order to fill my gaming needs. Taking all of this into account, it's no surprise at all that Bomber Games would begin work on their Streets of Rage Remake fan project at this time too. The Streets of Rage remake in question today was created by a Spanish developer who goes by the internet handle of Bomber Link. Unlike most fan projects that involve hacking ROMs or taking assets from other titles, the Streets of Rage remake on the other hand was made completely from scratch. To quote Bomber Link, it does not use reverse engineering nor a single line of code from the original games. It's all based on visual interpretation. To put the scale of this undertaking into perspective, although work would begin on this game in 2003, it would take an entire 8 years to complete. Pretty mental stuff really, considering each entry in the original trilogy was developed by huge teams all in under a year. The Streets of Rage remake would be a title that would be painstakingly created to include graphical improvements over the originals, completely new features not included in the original saga, the inclusion of fresh new scenarios, characters, remixed music, game modes, along with even a store where players can unlock extras. These new features are just the tip of the iceberg with this title, and we are going to look at the game in depth more shortly. But first, it is worth touching on one of the title's biggest controversies. It is no secret that large corporate entities usually hate it when fans infringe on their intellectual property. This is whether they are profiting off of it or not. Nintendo, for example, are infamous in getting fan projects pulled, and many fan games are cancelled via simple cease and desist notices, years before they even get off of the ground. Throughout history though, Sega has generally took a less conservative approach, which cannot be more evident than with their Sonic franchise. In fact, they were so impressed with Sonic fan projects that they would actually employ fan project leaders such as Christian Whitehead to direct Sonic Mania, a title that many would consider to be the greatest Sonic game released by Sega in years. Sadly though, with the Streets of Rage remake they took a very different approach. After the game had been in development for 8 years, Bomber Link would finally allow the game to be downloaded on PC during 2011. Just days after the release of this game though, on various download and torrent sites, Sega would attempt to get the game pulled. Their first stop would be on Link's own downloads on the game's official forum. Link would state, "Sega have contacted me regarding the download hosted on this site. While this issue is being resolved, please do not upload the game for others to download. Any links posted on this site will be removed." Wired.co.uk would contact Sega for a scoop with regards to this situation, and Sega would respond, saying, "Sega is committed to supporting any fans that take an interest in our games, and where possible, we do so by involving them in beta tests and other development, marketing or research opportunities. However, we need to protect our intellectual property rights, and this may result in us requesting that our fans remove online imagery, videos or games in some instances. Whilst companies are perfectly in their right to do this, this scenario still came as a shock to Bomber Games, as development of the title had been no secret and heavily publicised online for 8 years prior, and never before had Sega asked them to cease in the creation of the project. In fact, the game's development involved more than 20 collaborators, and apart from the Herculean undertaking being well documented online, according to the game's FAQ, Link's crew notified Sega of the game's development many years before its release, and did absolutely nothing to prevent the game's development prior. It is thought that Sega's sudden change of heart and protectionist behaviour around their IP was simply driven by the release of Streets of Rage 2 on iOS that same year, although conspiracist theorists believe the mobile release of such a game was in response to the remake. Despite Sega's best efforts though, when a fan project is out in the wild, it is out in the wild, and trying to stop it would be as futile as mankind thinking that they can stop coronavirus from spreading. Once it is out there, it is out there, and there is little anybody can do about it. Now we have got the long history out the way of how this game came to be, let's chat more about what the gameplay, story, characters and blah 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 has in this title. In this title, Mr. X maintains his role as the title's main antagonist, which is illustrated through the game's opening animations and text crawl, establishing the game's basic story. The first thing players will notice is the wonderful player select screen, which initially offers a choice of 6 different playable fighters. Essentially all 6 characters who starred within the original titles appear once again. Even frickin' Adam is back at long last. The character roster though is even larger than this, with a variety of unlockable characters included who we shall get to shortly. Away from a larger player selection than that of the originals, the story in this game is not linear, allowing players to choose one of 4 routes, which dictates which levels the player gets to play through to eventually reach a showdown with Mr. X himself. This concept was briefly dabbled with in Streets of Rage 3, where in the final portion of the game the player plays through different levels depending on what they achieve in the last few stages. It is amazing to see this concept massively expanded upon here. Each route draws various inspiration from the game's original trilogy, however it has all been remixed and rebuilt into something fresh and new. In terms of other new features, the game included bright and bold colours just like all of the previous official installments in the series, but in terms of graphical violence, it's now displayed slightly differently. Unlike the official games, this installment has the inclusion of blood within the combat. However, for those who like things more traditional, there is an option to turn this feature off. The ability to turn blood on or off in this game is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to this game's customizability. Players of this game also have the option of switching between bare knuckle and Streets of Rage themes, and can even tinker with the game further by applying filters such as scan lines or adjusting the transparency. The game includes all sorts of little bells and whistles that let you experience the game in a way that is as bespoke to your tastes as possible. Speaking of customization, even the title's gameplay itself is completely customizable, allowing players to tune their playthrough to that of which is most in line with their play style. Think of this as similar to the groove system in the Capcom vs SNK games, but with even more options. Players can choose the difficulty setting, how many lives they start out with, whether players can damage each other in combat and more. Even the combat itself offers a range of possibilities, offering a choice of different jump types, meter types, combo types, weapon types and even combos themselves. Luckily, the game does have default options though, meaning it is easy to just jump into this game without becoming overwhelmed with options. An argument could also be made that all of this customization can greatly upset the balance of the game, but let's be honest, this whole experience is more about fan service and celebrating the franchise's history, rather than prioritising anything else. The game can be set however way you like, I suppose. As one would hope, the game still features a lot of gameplay elements that harken back to the game's predecessors. The game contains various enemies who appeared in previous installments, but it mixes it up with a few new ones to deliver a fresh yet familiar experience. Like in all Streets of Rage games, practice makes perfect, and these villains can be disposed of through memorising patterns and footwork techniques. The enemies in this game are obviously located across the game's many branching paths. The game offers absurd replayability, as apart from providing challenge, the game's branching paths lead to 8 completely different endings for the player to discover. Whether a player survives a playthrough or not, points are awarded that can be spent in the game shop, where a variety of unlockable content is made available. This feature arguably makes the Streets of Rage remake even more playable than any of the official entries, with some fantastic unlockables available to find. Some of these unlockables are absolutely insane, so let's quickly run through a few that are available. Amongst this extra content is an entire new set of play modes, such as a boss rush mode and a survival mode, just as some examples. There are also silly GoldenEye style cheats that can be unlocked here, which come in an abundance. For example, you have the ability to give characters the ability to fight with fricking lightsabers of all things. The best of these unlockables come in the form of even more characters to control. This includes the hidden characters available in Streets of Rage 3, such as Roo the Kangaroo, Shiva, one of the game's villains, and even the infamous Ash, the character who was banned from the international version of Streets of Rage 3 due to Sega of America not being happy that the character had homosexual connotations. Unlockable characters do not stop here though, and Streets of Rage Remake has a few characters who have never been playable in the franchise before. This includes the game's main villain himself, Mr. X, who wields a frickin' machine gun. A dominatrix named Ellie, who is based on the Electra sprite from the previous games. And Rudra, a completely new character for the game who was created completely from scratch for this title. All in all, the game includes a whopping 12 playable characters, a crazy amount for any beat 'em up. Obviously, each of these are selectable to either player during cooperative play, but in another first for the Streets of Rage series, the game even includes cooperative play where the CPU controls the second player. Like everything else in the game, the CPU player's playstyle is customizable, offering the player even further choices, which is what this game seems to be all about really. There really is an abundance of things to do in this game and tinker with. To give you an idea of the sheer size and scale of this game, there are a whopping 103 different phases to play through. But as we know, Streets of Rage is about more than the level design itself. And a Streets of Rage video would not be a Streets of Rage video without talking about the music. Composer Yuzo Koshiro's music within the Streets of Rage trilogy is considered some of the best music ever found within any video games. The soundtrack of this remake features an abundance of fantastic sounding remixes and rearrangements of some of Koshiro's best work, as illustrated by this video. This reworking of the game's music was the work of Gecko Yamori, Caliph and Co, who did a fantastic job here. Going back to the game's aesthetics themselves, the graphics in this game are probably a slight step up from what the 16-bit Mega Drive would have been capable of, but it still feels in line with the look and feel of the classic series, which in fact makes me wish someone would find a way to port this game to the bloody Sega Saturn. The same goes for Sonic Mania 2 actually, in regards to this. One more unlockable feature of this game is that the title even includes a Streets of Rage Maker feature. This mode allows the users to create, edit and design their own levels with a maximum allowed of 8 levels and 16 scenes in each one. For the design of scenes, fans recommend the use of the FPG Edit program from the company Codemasters. From the project community, you can download mods made by fans, thus increasing the gameplay of the game. The maker feature of this game has resulted in a few great fan projects in its own right too. There were also many other features that were included in this game, such as 64 artificial intelligence modules for CPU controlled characters, improved collision and system damage data, improved animation, an improved cartwheel and grip system, autosave functionality, extended action for 6-button controls, the addition of weapon specials, and the return of the police call, originally seen in the first Streets of Rage game but dropped for later installments. This game is deeply extensive in what it offers players, and is perhaps the most impressive fan project that has ever been undertaken. In fact, calling the game a Streets of Rage remake is slightly misleading, and does not give this project the credit it deserves. Remakes of games like those found in the Mario All-Stars pack feature the same gameplay with completely remade graphics, making those games remakes of older ones. The Streets of Rage remake, on the other hand, is more of a full-on reboot or reimagining of an older game, rather than something that has simply been remade. You cannot refer to this title as a remake, because no title like this has existed previously. The upcoming Final Fantasy VII remake seems to suffer from falling into the same logic hole, as from everything I've seen on that title, it delivers a totally different experience from the original Final Fantasy VII game. So it really does leave me wondering why developers would choose to undersell their achievements in such a way, when in both of these games' cases they are clearly full-on reboots rather than old games that have just been remade. To re-emphasise the point once again, you cannot remake what has never been made in the first place. Simple logic to follow, really. But whether the game is a true remake or not, there is no denying how fantastic the title is, and the people working on the current Streets of Rage 4 game have a huge mountain to climb when making that one, if they even want to stand a chance of topping this game. The game really is that special, and in my opinion, the ultimate Streets of Rage game in existence at this point in time. Just wow. So ladies and gentlemen, that was the mad story of Streets of Rage Remake, one of the most impressive fan projects of all time, that took 8 years to complete. If there are any other Streets of Rage fan games you would like me to take a deep dive look at, then I would love to hear from you in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed today's video, do not forget to like, subscribe and hit the notification bell to make sure you never miss one of my videos. Finally, my channel is partially funded by the generous donations I receive via Patreon. Patrons can earn a credit and a shout out at the end of these videos, as well as a producer credit at the beginning. These people make working full time on YouTube just that little bit easier, so I'd like to thank all of you very much for that. Huge shout outs go out to Carl Johnson, Sebastian Venice, SpongeMat BYT, House of the Ted, JD Robbins, Sid Spaces, Andrew Bazansky, Asobi Kwang DX, Michael Baker, Tom Elliott, Computer Man, Antonio Rodriguez, Craig Jenkins, Daniel Daly, RetroReversing.com, Dan Barlow Jr., Joel, and all of my other patrons. Yeah, voiceover is done.